Good morning, everybody. My name is Craig Smith, professor in English at University of the Bahamas. Dr. Marie Sayre Singh was supposed to be your moderator today, but unfortunately she wasn't able to make it. So I will be moderating the panel. Also, another update, Dr. Keith Russell will not be here today either, so we'll just have two presenters. What I'll do, I will introduce both speakers, and then we will start with Patricia Glinton-McColdis, and we will end with Dr. Curry, and we're trying to make up time, so we'll have maybe time for 3 questions, and then we'll move into lunch, and if you have more questions at that time, you can continue the conversation then, okay? All right, so to begin with, Patricia Glinton-McColdis is a poet, essayist, cultural historian, and author of 22 books for use in the nation's schools. This graduate of the University of the West Indies and the University of Miami is widely recognized as a researcher and authority in the folklore art culture of the Bahamas. She holds a Bahamas Cacique Award for writing and a Silver Jubilee of Independence Medal for literature. Her monograph on Bahamian folktales appears in the Encuentro series of the Inter-American Development Bank. She has contributed a chapter to Routledge's Companion to International Children's Literature, poems to New Daughters of Africa, and other publications and essays to the Grove Dictionary of Art and the Oxford University Press Dictionary of Caribbean and Afro-Latin American Biography. Her presentation is National Development and Colonialism. Our second presenter today will be Dr. Christopher Curry. Born in the Bahamas, Christopher Curry earned his doctorate degree in history from the University of Connecticut in 2011. Currently, he serves as director of AMMC and associate professor of history in School of Social Sciences. We're trying to claim him. School of Social Sciences at the University of the Bahamas. Outside of these professional responsibilities, Dr. Curry has published several books and articles. In 2006, he successfully co-authored a 3-volume series entitled Social Studies for Bahamian Secondary Schools, published by Macmillan Caribbean. Those books are widely circulated throughout junior high schools in the Bahamas. He also co-authored a church history book entitled A History of the Churches of Christ in the Bahamas, self-published in 2007 through Trafford Publishing, located in Victoria, British Columbia. Published articles include The Contributions of Baptists to Education in the Bahamas, American Baptist Quarterly, A Critique of Bahamian Society After Emancipation, at Random, and Christianity and Slavery in the Bahamas, A Catalyst for Revolutionary Changes, or A Quest for Respectability in the Bahamas Historical Journal. Recently published the spring of 2017 is his monograph study entitled Freedom and Resistance, A Social History of Black Loyalists in the Bahamas. So we'll begin with the presentation by Patricia Glinton-McColdis.
National development has long been a concern and focus of my research and writing. Recently, concern has deepened to disquiet and even apprehension. Many vampiric forces, political, social, environmental, and geopolitical, hover to threaten the nation's peace and progress. Holding learned forums on such matters deeply impinging national development is an imperative. I thank Dr. Ian Strawn and his team for their excellent contribution and for inviting me to present. Juan Perez, the brilliant CEO of Salesforce, speaks of constructive dissatisfaction. This is my route today. The Bahamas in 2023 is 50 years old as a sovereign nation, and middle age should signal greater maturity. Yet, past its first proud decade of sovereignty, this country has addressed national development like a callow youth who drives a powerful and costly vehicle, untested and unlicensed. Competing with other testosterone drunk racers, our driver flies in the wrong direction down one-way streets and into dead ends on a thrill ride with fair weather friends and show-off scrubs. Laws, speed restrictions, wise custom, and consequences be damned. It's time to build a development plan reflecting land and people in all our realities, free of imprudent road choices, reckless speed, and tardy detailing for show rather than roadworthiness. Hope springs eternal for those who love this blessed archipelago. So it was when I came across a speech delivered by Prime Minister the Honorable Philip Davis in 2022, 9 months after his party's spectacular election win. In that communication, Mr. Davis promised re-engagement with development planning as a central element of his governance agenda. Happily, he listed priorities for this vital exercise. As promising was the Prime Minister's assertion that without a sense of focus, a sense of priorities, we spread, I quote, we'll spread ourselves too thinly and end up achieving nothing. Better still, he emphasized essential interdependence. Topping the priorities was education, which he deemed the path to empowerment and prosperity, and a means of enabling Bahamians to access opportunities his administration was seeking to stimulate in today's color-coded economies. His admitting to education's inadequacies and decrying aspects of web-based social media's countervailing quality was welcome. For this passionate member of the creative sector, the member of the creative sector, the PM, as concert master of his verbal orchestration, launched the music with the announcement of a school for the creative and performing arts. Plans for expanding health and wellness programs were also timely. Next, the PM said rightly, most national development plans build out from economic policy. He followed with brief notes on fiscal policy, tourism, and diversification. In this age of wokeness, real or feigned, there came reference to the prognosticated archipelago swallowing climate and environmental changes. Up to cultural and social, the fifth movement of the concerto, the leader's speech tripped lightly like Vivaldi's Spring with only a hint of winter's chill. He said he did not wish to, and I quote, veer into something too bleak, but wanted his audience to understand that climate change posed an existential threat to our country. So true. I was now open to hope. Never mind that the music was sampled as skillful DJs do, rather than elucidating mechanisms for action. I accepted the lightweight listing as strategy, a Potemkin facade, to build to hide the debris of the heavy construction necessarily engaged to realize stated ambitions. I hoped earnestly that the speech wouldn't prove elusive, like old Western movie props with nothing but desert and tumbleweeds behind. Then the music screeched a halt, as when the stylus of an old record player skips and scratches a vinyl disc, arresting its spin. Mr. Davis shared his perception that conversations and images on social media too often represent Bahamians as a violent, conflict-driven people. Had our leaders bought into tourism's mysticizing of the Isles of Perpetual June and Life's a Beach? Indeed, our out islands still hold mostly true to this pristine representation. In New Providence, however, where over 70% of Bahamians live and work, violence is already becoming an entree on the daily menu, sunny side down. Is this awareness of how encroachment on civil liberties that could counter the amelioration of issues government has deemed priorities? While the brighter side of life may be fine as tourism attraction, it is dangerously limited as a blueprint for safe living and national advancement. My view of national development is not the economist's dizzying array of mathematical constructs, acronyms, and other exercises in obscurantism. My concern is the proliferation of freedom abrogating factors that undermine human rights and the productivity of vital systems supporting quality life. Richard Haas's Reluctant Sheriff, the title of his book. The Bahamas' powerful next-door neighbor and friend now wields the biggest stick globally and certainly in Bahamian life. But this is not my focus today. While I thank Britain for its endowment of language, literature, and parliamentary democracy, my talk explores first persistent legacies of British rule which have cratered our road to national development. Secondly, I will reflect upon homegrown colonialism, which has made a mockery of the fine principles of majority rule and independence. These operating systems have spawned a complex, insidious ethos which siphons the marrow of productivity, civil rights, and liberties. Even with declarations of independence, many former colonies have only been able to self-define and manage internal development in tight spaces, grudgingly apportioned by global powers. Even more invidious, vital elements of decolonization have advanced too slowly and even stalled because of seemingly impregnable Anglophilia. Many even fight to retain harmful mores and social and economic policies bequeathed by the British Imperium. Our public service is burdened by a convolution of offices and officers, rivalries for prominence and promotion, and unwieldy administrative terminology and practices, stifling freedom of action, creativity, initiative, and enthusiasm. Anachronistic systems have generated voluminous paper trails and archives, leading to time efficiently and document loss and even invalidity. All contribute to making a mockery of progressivism, and ease of doing business. Happily, government is making steady incursions into digitization, witness e-passport, and the My Gateway platform for accessing a wealth of government services, and central bank's initiation of Sand Dollar, the digital Bahamian currency. Embedded in our justice system is British common law. This body of precedents offers consistency and stability to useful extent. Nevertheless, geographical specificity and age can diminish its value to a developing nation. Exacerbating the problem are deeply reactionary attitudes to law, justice, and penal systems, destructively focused on punishment rather than redemption. How much valuable human capital is lost thereby? Despite the proliferation of legal professionals, the sector seems to address modernization at a snail's pace. A graver threat to democracy and progress has been self-imposed colonialism. Of deep concern, legislators pass essential laws but flout them in practice. To wit, the Public Procurement Acts. How many claims of special circumstances will arise to circumvent these security provisions and allow graft to flourish? As troubling are persistent forms of consumer exploitation, sketchy monitoring and prosecution promote overpricing and sales of goods and services of substandard quality. Even graver, we boast of democracy while supporting freedom's reciprocals. Prevailing are covert forms of enslavement in the twisted psychology of the once oppressed. The sad irony is that our islands have long been rocks of refuge, as Marion Bethel terms them. The archipelago was first populated by waves of immigrants in search of freedom, beginning with the Lucayans and the Eleutherian adventurers. Yet, escaping oppression, some migrants readily oppressed in the new homeland. Slave-owning American loyalist refugees fortified and codified a race, skin color-based hierarchy and spatial apartheid. Following the world wars, affluent whites fleeing Britain and the United States to protect their wealth from inflated taxation were none loath to bolster pernicious prejudices. And how is it that Bahamians of African descent, once a forced underclass, have occupied the Great House only to repeat strident iniquities, including coercive ethnic biases, tribalism, and new oligarchic dynasties to fortify or extend economic strangleholds? Moreover, politicking has buttressed the absurdities of gender inequities and the award of citizenship. Similarly, election fever fertilizes the theocratic inclinations of the religious right, dangerously narrowing the essential distance between church and state made law in 1869. Self-aggrandized and satisfied bigots, cloaked in gorgeous robes, officialdom, ceremony, and sanctimony, supported by large worshipful followings and mean-spirited fanatics, have become another brand of colonizer. These are they who have written an apocryphal gospel, the book of hypocrisy, putting civil liberties on the auction block. This noxious coterie has othered Bahamians and migrants whose skin color falls outside the optimal shades for affluence and social inclusion. They gut the civil liberties of people of dissenting sexual orientation. While women represent 51.4% of the Bahamian population, as compared to 48.6% of males, our sex is disenfranchised by widespread misogyny. The chief proponents of toxic self-righteousness cherry-pick from scriptures to discount women's leadership as rulers, judges, seers, and salvers through centuries. Bahamian leaders ignore African wisdom that revered the abilities of such queens as Ya, Asentewa, Nzinga, and Amina. Not sufficiently praised are Bahamian women who have served valiantly as family providers and protectors in mitigating paternal delinquency and when their men have sought work abroad. Nor are we celebrated as chief creators and carriers of essential Bahamian narratives. Instead, legal and practical subalternity is forced on women excelling across the economic spectrum. Why douse this flame to national deprivation? Today, women's rights and bodies are colonized. Why are women deemed personality for the chance-met rapists? Why are wives bound as domestic chattel, subject to the will of abusive husbands and others who consider pusillanimous Ephesians exhorting husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church. Even more bizarre is the complicity of sisters who revel in the little woman designation. What of proud sovereignty when the Bahamas is one of the 35 countries that have not yet recognized and criminalized marital rape? How much more suffering and loss from abuse must women and children endure before relief and dignity are chiseled into the stone of law? Why is gender equality still in suspense, a phantom limb longed for and aching? We pretend to political correctness by signing hot topic international treaties on human rights and climate justice without enshrining and energizing them in law and purposive action. We have held 2 referenda on the subject, both defeated. Incomprehensibly, the electorate's resounding no to a 2013 poll on legalizing gambling for Bahamians was voided by the stroke of an imperious pen. Gender equality has not been afforded the same grace. Partisan politics, self-interest, and ignorance have created a dangerous stasis that hampers fair and comprehensive lawmaking. This is a polity that promotes the Bahamian Constitution as sacrosanct and locked to amendments. Our laws threaten to become an atrophied skin, no longer flexible enough to treat our economic and societal wounds and heal. We Bahamians have much to be proud of in fostering democracy. By global standards, the Bahamas Freedom Index is competitive and even high in terms of political pluralism and participation, as well as stable government and judiciary. We do well in areas of civil liberties such as freedom of expression, belief, association, and union organization. There remain, however, toxicities to be expunged from the rule of law and aforementioned areas of gender equality and personal autonomy. It's time to re-engage development planning as genuinely collective and organic endeavor. We must raise and answer critical, often painful questions. Of supreme importance, will national planning embrace in equity all Bahamians, no matter our skin color, ethnic heritage, sexual orientation, religion, wealth, or percentage we represent in the population? It must. Furthermore, with increasing calls for the establishment of a republic, can we expect an intelligent comparison of our Westminster parliamentary governance versus a presidential system for best fit? Shouldn't we also reassess our regional face regarding CARICOM membership and potential adoption of the Caribbean Court of Justice? Will the realities of our environment, history, culture, and the just needs of our people be viewed through the microscope of truth, or will it be obscured by the heavily frosted glass of partisan politics or tourism promotion? Will the protection of national assets be held as sacrosanct or trumped by greed? Will planners pay attention to geopolitical risks and learn from the successes or mistakes of other states? Will we revise the inequities of citizenship awards, especially as regards Bahamas-born contributing descendants of Haiti? Or will the latest plan continue to foster indigenous colonialism, condemning too many of our people to a half-life of economic, intellectual, artistic, and spiritual poverty as the native other? Unless we stem the flood of licentious gun culture, weed out legislative inequities and increase the cultivation of life-preserving freedom, we will reap naught but grapes of wrath. Our Prime Minister is committed to ensuring that the country's laws and policies are fair and just for all Bahamians, and also to building a more inclusive and equitable Bahamas. Parliamentarians and Bahamians in general, there can be no more auspicious time than now to write our names on history's right-facing pages. Let our Bahamas shine in the annals of freedom. Thank you.
Just checking the time so I can greet you with good morning rather than good afternoon. So good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank the organizers for what I consider to be a fantastic conference so far, and one which I think was absolutely needed. And so I'm just happy to be a participant. Let me start with a confession. Confession number one, what I'm about to share with you is not exactly new. It is part of a paper that I once presented when Dr. William Darity invited me to be a part of a global blackness conference at Duke University. I have also shared with a couple of persons this version some time ago. And then my second confession is, in self-disclosure, I'm fairly young, considering that, even though I don't look so, I was almost 2 when I sat on my dad's shoulders at Clifford Park on the eve of independence to watch the Union Jack, the British flag, pulled down, or yucked down, to use the Bahamian vernacular, and our Bahamian flag hoisted for the first time. And that I have a photo of. I don't recollect, and I only share that with you to let you know that I am, in fact, a child of independence. And this is a journey that I have taken, and one that I want to begin with from that vantage point. Theoretically, my paper is engaging Benedict Anderson's concept of an imagined community. So my topic is imagining the nation, Bahamian national identity in the post-independence period. I want to begin with 2 speeches that were made, one by Pinling before majority rule and one after independence. In 1966, a year before the PLP party was to win the election, Lyndon Pinling stood before the United Nations and gave a speech that focused on the question of national identity. Bahamian is not a legal term under the Constitution, yet no one can say with any degree of truth that we are British. As a people, we are without history, without culture, and without national identity. We study British history, British civilization, and even British weather. But about ourselves, we have no past, and under colonialism, no future. This speech articulated the damaging legacy in which British colonialism had not only stripped away any sense of self-worth and belonging, but made the very concept of what it means to be a Bahamian difficult to define. Moving forward to his second speech, this one was delivered on July 10th, 1974, on the occasion of the first anniversary of independence. Here now, Prime Minister Pinling addressed a large crowd at the opening of the Bahamas Museum and Art Gallery held at Jumbe Village. In his speech, Pinling stressed the importance of preservation and conservation of the Bahamian culture and way of life. In advancing a need to preserve Bahamian heritage, Pinling warned that in a small country as ours, there is a real danger of our intrinsic cultural identity being swamped by alien influences from within and without, end quote. In coupling both of Pinling's speeches together, what emerges is a nation-building project that was highly problematic and which had various strands that were competing against each other. On the one hand, there was an effort to orient the emerging nation with the Black Power movement in the US and international struggles for decolonization occurring in the Caribbean and Africa. This strand looked outward, regionally and even diasporically. Within this, what I call Black internationalist frame, the Bahamian nation was not only envisioned as embodying a Black racial identity, but as Howard Johnson has suggested, it was a clear rejection of the white counter-identity of the recently ended period of white supremacy in which the Black majority had, in society, economy, and history books, been marginalized. The second speech suggests Bahamian citizenship was cast very narrowly in opposition to alien forces outside and inside the Bahamas. This trope used by Pinling was actually a re-articulation of an earlier sentiment that had its roots in the 1920s when a Bahamas for Bahamian policy was first enacted by the white ruling oligarchy in opposition to West Indian migrants entering the Bahamas at that time. Taken together, both streams, the Black racial identity and the anti-immigrant one, led to a self-consciously constructed national identity that was imagined as homogeneous and immutable. Such an imagined community, to borrow Benedict Anderson's language, had three major dimensions. First, a binary construction of race in which a Black national identity was pitted in opposition to a white counter-identity. Second, an anti-immigrant posture in which the Bahamian self was defined in relation to the Haitian other. And then third, an uncritical assertion of Bahamian culture as being fixed, unalterable, immutable, and even expressed monolithically in the annual Junkanoo Parade. All three are extremely problematic, and I wish to explain why, with a little bit of time that Mr. Smith has given me. Let's first talk about race. Interestingly, in creating this Black national identity, it was clear from independence there was an effort to promote this as a kind of imagined national community. For example, in February of 1973, the Archives held an exhibition entitled Aspects of Slavery. And at the opening, the Honorable Livingston Coakley, Minister of Education and Culture, he remarked, "The survival despite hardships and extreme difficulties by Bahamian forebears is a practical illustration for present citizens on the eve of nationhood." Note, this is February 73, so this obviously is before independence, but already you're seeing the imagined community, one that is focusing on an African past, but an unproblematized African past. Coakley's emphasis on the shared historical experience of Bahamians of African ancestry provided a sense of national consciousness and unity. This suggests that a cohesive sense of belonging was attached to Blackness and African-derived cultural expressions as essential developing a sense of nationality. However, the idea of a homogenized Africa is highly problematic. Africa is a very complex continent, and it has many very diverse religions, ethnic groups, and of course, cultural practices. All of that, though, was not examined or articulated in this notion of an African past. This same idea was also articulated in newspaper articles at the time. For example, Lisa Allain, writing in The Guardian, March 1st, 1973, wrote, "Our Bahamian identity is a unique identity because it is based on our African experiences and our Bahamian experiences. I know the colored people are saying that they have never been to Africa to have such an experience, but there are the experiences of our forefathers that produced Junkanoo, Gumbe, etc. These are the experiences that make us our identity and culture. These are the experiences that make Bahamians unique." Notice how there's almost an attempt to make these expressions of Africanness immutable, that Junkanoo, Gumbe are exactly as they are, cemented in time, almost ahistorical realities, not fluid, not movable, not changing. And then, of course, the other issue here is in projecting a particular identity attached to blackness and Africanness, there's also the problematic issue of how they adjusted to the issue of ethnicity and nationality. And here I'm speaking about how the othering of the Haitian emerges with independence as well. So the project of othering the Haitian required the erasure of a long history of Haitian-Bahamian contact originating with the Haitian Revolution. Successive waves of Haitian migrants entered the Bahamas and made important contributions to the social, economic, and political life of the colony, even to the point where individuals such as Stephen Dillett, John Goodman, and George LaRota, all of Haitian descent, had been among the first persons of color elected to the House of Assembly. And if we didn't have a Goodman's Bay or a Stephen Dillett School, those names probably would be obfuscated from our memory to this point as well. However, Haitians had a long period of important contributions to our economy. In the early 20th century, they provided provisions for starving out islanders. And more telling was the repression of denial of distinct family lines and even changing or anglicizing names to cover up Haitian background or roots by many of our government officials. Haitians were disdained because of their language, social conditions, and willingness to do work that was considered beneath that of the average white or black Bahamian. Haitian became the racialized and inferior other, as Creighton and Saunders have suggested. And in fact, we see that Haitian identity is seen as a counterpoint to Bahamian identity, and yet the troublesome matter on this is that we define ourselves by negation. In other words, we say that we are not Jamaican, we are not Cuban, we are definitely not Haitian. Rather than saying this is who we are, we say this is what we're not. And you can see the problem right there. And then, of course, is the way that we have created this very negative stigmatization about the Haitian other. We have this view that the Haitian is, in fact, more African. The Haitian is, in fact, less Creole. The Haitian is, in fact, less civilized. The Haitian is, in fact, more like a savage. And these kind of ideas percolate in our society to the point where in trying to dismiss or other or marginalize, we have actually fed into an ontological tradition of the West that Eurocentric views of Africa have been employed to dismiss and demean a Haitian. And yet the problem with that is we have an African diasporic identity that is intrinsically tied to Haitians. With the transatlantic slave trade coercively bringing millions of persons across the Atlantic. And so instead of elevating the experience of a diasporic identity, we devalue, diminish, demean, and stigmatize people that have a shared common past and that we can grow strength from rather than reducing them to the same savage ideology and racial construct that Europeans invented at the point of the transatlantic slave trade. Okay, I want to also talk a little bit about how we have created a national identity that has created a problematic issue when it comes to culture. And of course, here we're talking about Junkanoo. And, you know, we think of Junkanoo as a quintessential Bahamian cultural festival. And it is important, and by the way, I'm not dismissing or demeaning Junkanoo. I think it's a wonderful festival. But you know what it has done is it has not really problematized our other expressions of culture. It has, in many ways, obfuscated the performing arts. To quote Dr. Ian Strawn, and others, he has lamented that Junkanoo as a popular masquerade art of the Bahamas has often so dominated the landscape of artistic productions, there is little space for critiquing Bahamian society through the performing arts. And so while we see money and oftentimes energy put into Junkanoo parades, what is not so obvious and which is clearly evident is that we do not see the performing arts being elevated or funding the way that it ought to. Efforts to regularize and control Junkanoo parades suggest a universalizing approach to cultural production on the part of the state. In so doing, the state has reimagined Junkanoo as a consumer product to be sold to the tourists as a neat, orderly, and structured parade. This particular remapping has allowed Junkanoo to serve as an essentialized representation of Bahamian culture without any complicated narratives or critical edges. Reflecting this essentializing sense of ownership, Maureen Devallier, ironically of Haitian roots, has stated, "It's our culture. We were born into this, and we are the only people in this world that can boast Junkanoo, you know." This is absolutely outrageous. We already know that Junkanoo exists in places like Belize, in South Carolina, in Jamaica is a John Canoe rural festival, and so it is a part of a larger diasporic narrative. And yet we have people who are saying that Junkanoo is owned only by Bahamians, and this notion of owning something is highly problematic as well. But the idea, too, that Junkanoo is somehow fixed and mutable, that it doesn't change, and it's been the same way all the time, is absolutely ludicrous. One only has to know, for example, the story of how the costumes have changed, from raffia to newspaper to sponge to crepe paper, and now, of course, felt and tricks. So just looking at the costumes will tell you that Junkanoo is always changing. And the idea that it's owned only by the Bahamas, just crazy. So beyond this, we want to talk a little bit about how we think about museums. And I'm trying to weave all these ideas together when I close. So forgive me if they seem like tangential kind of threads at this point. One of the things that we note is that in imagining the nation, there was no concern or effort given to how we might valorize our own heroes. It is deeply problematic that right now, if you look at our statues, for example, in New Providence, we have a diminutive bust of Sir Milo, a man who in life was quite rotund and not diminutive at all. And the story, of course, as you know, 2 weeks before the April 27th, 1965 incident known as Black Tuesday, he required 4 men, constables, to carry him out of the House of Assembly. Of course, his brother in arms, A.D. Hanna, was so upset that he only needed 1 man to carry him out. He says, "Go get me them other 3. But the point is, we have a statue of a diminutive bust of Sir Milo. Contrast that to the other side of the street. We have Queen Victoria apparently enthroned on a throne, and it's 10 feet tall. Thanks to Michael the Archangel, Columbus was removed from Government House. I'm wondering if the angels are going to intercede on our behalf to remove Woodes Rogers from the Colonial Hotel. But the point is this. We have these statues and monuments that reify a colonial past rather than an independent present. And I'm wondering when we're going to have a National Heroes Park where we can actually have monuments to persons that represent our heritage and our history. It bothers me, too, that we have a statue of Sir Lyndon Oscar Pinling, and of course, LPIA, the airport, is named after him. But unless you really drive slow, and unless you have your eyes wide open as you turn to the side of the international terminal, you may miss Sir Lyndon. If you blink, you definitely will miss him. I've been to countries like Cuba, and Jose Marti, and of course, Castro and others. They have statues, they have murals that are 3-4 stories high. I've been to Canada, that beautiful country that they spent 10 years, and they have a statue of Sir Isaac Brock, who fought and apparently died on the plains during the War of 1812, and apparently he spoke to his horse in Latin, and the last thing he said to his horse was "Surgite," which in Latin I think means press on. They have a 60-foot statue of Sir Isaac Brock. But what do we have? And as we speak about museums, we have a Pompeii Museum, and I'm pleased to say as director that we have a temporary exhibit of Valor of the Vanquished to the Lucayan people on the 2nd floor. The bottom floor, of course, celebrates emancipation and insurrectionists of Pompeii. But where is our National Museum? Where is the National Museum of the Bahamas? Just yesterday in Parliament, they spoke about it as they were amending our 2012 Undersea Cultural Heritage Act, and I hear a promise now of a national museum being considered. But this is 2023. Why have we not imagined a national identity that is more inclusive? Why have we not imagined museums that speak to our identity, our history, our culture? Why is it that we're talking about this in 2023 and not 1973? Why have we marginalized our ethnic minorities, our Greeks, our Lebanese, our Chinese? Why is it that we have a binary construction of race relations in the Bahamas that pit whites versus blacks, rather than imagining a polyglot, multicultural community that actually is the Bahamas? Why is it that we have not yet configured an idea of a national heroes park where we can give homage to all people who have struggled for freedom and equality in this country? Why is it that we're having these conversations today when we should have had these conversations 20, 30 years ago? Why is it we have to wait for tomorrow when we were promised something yesterday? Thank you very much.
Alrighty, thank you, Dr. Curry, for sticking to the time limit. It is lunchtime, ladies and gentlemen, but we will take a couple questions or comments. Dr. Curry is the only one here right now, and so if we can take maybe 2 questions or comments, and then we can continue over lunch. Dr. Bethel? Okay.
Thank you. So thank you so much for those presentations, particularly yours, Chris, because I just want to raise something. In writing something that Dr. Ian Bethel Bennett made me write, I was forced to consider one of the museums you've missed out is the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas, which is absolutely glorious and beautiful. Now, I was forced to consider how that came about, because the act that governs the NAGB was written basically around the same time as the act that governs the National Museum. And at the time that they imagined that, let's think about that, in the middle of the 1990s, after the change of government, they imagined a Nassau that had a museum at either end. They imagined a museum in Villa Doyle and a museum in the Collins House. Why did it not happen? That's the question that I want to ask. I'll throw out a couple of ideas and a couple of possibilities. One is that they were under 2 different ministries. The museum, the National Art Gallery, was under the Museum of Education, and the National Museum was under the Museum of Culture. These were headed by 2 different politicians who had 2 different relationships to the Prime Minister.
Interesting.
And yes, and Erica may have something to add to that. Oh, excellent. Excellent. Because the I will tell you. Okay, so the Minister of Education was Dame Ivy Dumont, and also supporting the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas was Dr. Gail Saunders, both of whom were very much admired by the Prime Minister. On the other hand, the Minister in charge of Culture, or who became not the Minister in charge of Culture, was Algernon Allen, who had been openly critical of the Prime Minister. And so what we need to add in, and this is kind of following or riffing off of what Dr. McCartney said, we cannot continue to talk about our country without thinking about the impact, particularly on cultural institutions, because I don't need to mention Jumbay Village, of personal differences at the top. We have had, most recently, the National Dance School was closed in 2019, I think. And I don't know what the reason was. But I am hearing from within the ministry, it was, again, another personal issue. So this is something that we have to start to inscribe, because it cannot be allowed to continue. That's all I want to say.
I wanted to add a little bit. I sit on 4 government boards. I sit on NAGB's board, Public Records, AMMC, and Clifton. What I'm finding, Nicolette, is this competition between the different boards rather than working together. We tend to be competing against each other for limited resources. We know that, for example, NAGB sits under Youth, Sports, and Culture, and Executive Director Ian Bethel Bennett is right here. My organization, AMMC, sits under the Prime Minister, under OPM directly. But because they sit under different ministries, again, that kind of pits one against the other. And then, of course, I've already said this, we do not give the kind of economic value to our arts, performing arts, visual arts, literary arts. We put money into tourism, we put money into things that people think will generate wealth. We don't put money into the things that actually define who we are as a people. All right, and that's what culture and the arts do for us. And so we've devalued these things. And where we do put money into the arts, it's Junkanoo. And that's it. That's what I was saying earlier. So your point is absolutely well taken, and I do apologize for leaving NAGB out. I will tell you this, Ian and I have met recently, and we're trying to work against that grain. We're actually talking about collaborating and doing stuff together. Ian and I have started that motion. So hopefully things will change, but it's still that kind of system, political and structural, that leads to these kind of divisions and ultimately lead to nothing really getting done substantively.
Okay, so it is now 12:13. We'll take one very short comment or question and a very short response, so we can be out of here by 12:15 and folks can have lunch, and we'll get back on track, yeah?
Okay, I'll try to keep this short. So to Dr. Bethel's point, I want us to stop framing it as personal difference, especially when it becomes a culture of victimization for the people who are trying to get these initiatives through. And the reason why I want us to do that is because when I think about the Jumbe village, that was victimization, right? And we know the way that we go about dealing with dissenting opinions. Even if I'm critiquing someone, like, I can have a difference of opinion but still be in league with you, but that's something that we don't cultivate in the Bahamas. Anyway, the point I wanted to talk about or comment on was the neoliberalization of Junkanoo. The fact that Junkanoo receives all this money, but the money doesn't trickle down. I was talking with someone who was saying that they stopped rushing. My brother was a part of Saxons. I rushed once, never again. It's not something I want to do. But I think about the money stays at the top, so Junkanoo ends up becoming like a pyramid scheme, where the majority of the money gets funneled to those persons who are loyal to the Junkanoo groups, similar to political parties, and the people who are at the bottom, they have to spend their own money to literally participate in the actual parade. And so all of the time, effort is never compensated. And I don't know, I guess we could speak to the kind of way that Junkanoo has become, because that word is, the pyramid scheme is actually what somebody said to me. They felt like Junkanoo had become a pyramid scheme where the people at the top get all the money through the groups, and the people at the bottom never receive any funding.
I feel like it's a classic example of commodification of culture. And so that is why you have this almost sanitized, structured, organized, choreographed, planned Junkanoo parade, timed. Everything is essential for marketing, for TV production and all of that. And so the spontaneity, you have to find it at the scrap gang level, and you have to find it in other places and spaces where the roots of Junkanoo still exist. But go to Bay Street, and it's something different now. And I'm not saying that's bad or right, I'm just saying it's a commodification of culture. And I think that's what you're speaking about, Natino.
All right, Dr. Curry, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. It's 15 minutes after the hour. Please have lunch. Bye.